Tonight's the night. Hey, great to have you here. So today I'll be reviewing episode 9 of Dexter Resurrection. As usual, we'll be running through the episode details and then giving an overall score at the end of either negative, neutral, or positive. This should be obvious, but I'll be covering some pretty major spoilers here, so just a forewarning there. And as a quick reminder, if you love Dexter as much as me, please consider subscribing to the channel for more future content. So we kicked this episode off right where we left off in the prior episode, with Leon Prater having just walked up on Dexter and Harrison at this restaurant. Through some of the discussion there, we learned that Harrison knows who Prater is from having listened to some TED Talks, so they gave an okay reason for Harrison to have recognized Prater. And during this conversation, Harrison is giving all this truth away to Prater, including his name, so Dexter wants to cut that off ASAP and step outside with Prater. And when they get out there, we're shown that somebody's taking photos of the two of them, which immediately makes me think Batista. As the two of them talk a little bit more, it becomes pretty apparent here that Prater still doesn't know who Dexter is and still thinks he's Red. And Prater is giving off some major Miguel Prado or Ice Truck Killer-like vibes, wanting to be buds with Dexter. Prater tells him, hey, actually Charlie, she's the skeptical one, and they wind up parting ways with Dexter saying, yeah, that's all good, just leave Harrison alone. And it did feel a little bit weird that in a crowded New York City, nobody walked by at all while they're talking outside on the sidewalk. Come on. But Dexter then goes back inside and grabs Harrison to head out the back door of the restaurant, which nobody stops him as he's walking through the kitchen. We see that once again, somebody's watching Dexter from afar. Dexter then tells Harrison all the truth about Prater and the dark passenger right out in the open on the streets in broad daylight. Isn't this breaking the first rule of the code, not getting caught? It feels like smarter to maybe talk about this once they get home. Dexter is so happy here though, like a kid at show and tell, when he's telling Harrison about all that he's done this season, like finding out the Gemini killers were twins. They then head down to the subway, and we see that it's Batista who's following them. Dexter tells Harrison that he's got to head out in case they're being followed, but if he's afraid of being watched, then why was he talking about everything so blatantly out in the open? Dexter does get off the train just before the doors close, leaving Harrison and Batista, who's on board a few cars down. And we get a bit of an in-your-face New York attitude interaction here that's definitely meant to be funny, where Batista curses in anger, and a mom sitting there is like, watch your effing mouth.
I'm walking here, up yours!
And now back at the hotel, Harrison has this colleague of his mention this high-paying job, and at first Harrison's like, hell yeah, let's do it, until he learns that it's for Prater, and then he's like, actually, nah, I'm good. Harrison's boss then comes in and tells him he has a room service request. He goes up there, and we see that it's Charlie, and she closes the door on Harrison as he brings in the food. I don't know why Dexter didn't really warn Harrison about Charlie, since Prater was claiming she was the real threat here, but Harrison may still have gotten cornered regardless. And now back over with Dexter, Harrison calls him freaking out. It's kind of a cool scene where Harrison's recalling his confrontation with Charlie, and we as the audience are in suspense, trying to figure out what Harrison may have told her. The only downside here I'll say is that it's some reduced tension because we know Harrison gets out of there okay. We find out that Charlie asked Harrison about his last name being Morgan and not Schmidt. Harrison says he took his mom's last name, Hannah Morgan, and says that his dad ditched him as a kid. And we get a little bit of a mixed truth and lies here from Harrison when talking to Charlie. And the main takeaway here is that it seems like Prater's not going to be leaving Harrison alone like he promised Dexter, and Charlie may actually be checking Harrison's fingerprints since he left some of the breakfast supplies there with Charlie. Dexter then heads upstairs and asks for a favor from Blessing. Blessing at first is still mad with Dexter, but pretty quickly forgives him here and says that he'll pick up Harrison from the hotel after he's done working. Dexter also gets Charlie's address from Harrison via looking up hotel records, and we get some more backstory here of Charlie and her mom being in the military, and we do see that Charlie kept the glass from the hotel to pull Harrison's fingerprints. Harry winds up popping up and talking with Dexter as he normally does here, and we find out that Harrison actually has no driver's license, but he's driven plenty already, kind of strange. And as Dexter continues to look around, he sees this chairlift at the staircase, and then when he goes upstairs, we actually learn that Charlie's mom is here being cared for at home, not a hospital. And we really haven't had Charlie be a prominent episode character previously, but she's always felt a little bit too formidable for Dexter. And now only partially through this episode, she's seeming pretty sloppy and very killable for Dexter. Either way, it seems pretty likely Dexter's going to use her mom as leverage here. Charlie's then shown out buying flowers. She walks by the backseat of her car, gets in the car, and then somehow in broad daylight doesn't see Dexter in the back seat. I'm definitely thinking, how did he get there? And how did she not notice him or prepare for him? The first time they met, she had him get in the passenger seat, so she's supposed to be super cautious and smart. She tries to pull her gun out, but Dexter says to drive and has the whole dark passenger wire around her neck. He does wind up bringing up her mom as leverage. She gives her whole backstory here, saying that she worked private security all over the world, and she wound up connecting with Prater through that. and Prater offered to help to pay to take care of her mom, if in return, she would help hunt down these serial killers for Prater's club. And all this time, Charlie's definitely felt reluctant to be working for Prater, so this is kind of the backstory I had in mind for her character, since her and her mom seem to be in the situation together, not necessarily by choice. Dexter brings up her having visited Harrison, and she's super panicked here, asking if he killed her mom. And she admits here that everything she's done was at Prater's request, and that he exploits people's weaknesses, aka her mom and Dexter's son. Dexter ultimately lets her go, but not before giving a warning. He has her pull over and says leave Harrison alone or he's going to visit her again soon. We then cut over to Wallace and Oliva, looking at these hooks that open manholes. Per Dexter's tip, she's reciting all these departments that have access to this kind of tool, and when she says Parks and Rec, Oliva's like, oh, I love that show, once again kind of feeling like a distraction to their efforts. But after hearing all the departments that could be viable options here, he's like, we're pretty much looking for a needle. And she goes, as in a haystack? That's a good one. And he responds with saying, I saw that smile, so maybe they're just goofy partners. Oliva's feeling like a little bit less guilty from this interaction. Batista then shows up because apparently Wallace requested to see him. She tells him that he's breaking the law by impersonating a police officer since he's now retired, and he says he stepped away to bring Dexter to justice. But then we have Wallace and Oliva mention Dokes and Maria and tell Batista that he needs to cease and desist or he's going to ultimately be arrested. At this point, he needs to go back to his hotel and just pack his things. But before leaving, he gets one final gut punch with Oliva saying that Miami Metro asked for his shield back, which he does begrudgingly give up. And as he's walking away, Batista's clearly broken down at this point, and you really feel bad for him here. But before leaving, he does see a flyer for Prater's gala, and he makes that connection between seeing Prater early on at the opening of the episode with Dexter. We then cut over to Dexter coming home at night, and he hears a girl's noise inside of his apartment and is freaking out about it potentially being Charlie. But this is a pretty bad fake out in my opinion. We all pretty much know it's Gigi with Harrison. And it's definitely pretty dumb for Harrison to bring her back here, given all the risk going on here. We get some flirty small talk between them that makes Dexter feel super awkward. They also do the silly it's spatter, not splatter banter that we've gotten before, and Gigi actually mocks Dexter's old line of work as being pretty ancient at this point. And I am starting to wonder, is Gigi potentially going to be in Prater's crossfire? We'll have to see. And of course, the very first night of Harrison, who's supposed to be staying at Dexter's apartment here, he immediately wants to go elsewhere and stay with Gigi. And Prater may not know where either Gigi or Dexter live, but Dexter can protect Harrison and knows that there's a threat going on, but the same's not true for Gigi. We also do get a pretty comedic line by Dexter saying, hey, for spending the night there, you might want some protection. And obviously it's not a weapon that he hands over to Harrison. And now shifting over to Charlie, who's with Prater, she's telling him everything that happened with Dexter, and he creepily wants to see her neck injury from that wire. He's so excited that she survived a serial killer attack, and Prater truly being unhinged is starting to come out here. Prater mentions Charlie being a message from Dexter, and brings up her mom to enforce Charlie's obedience to him. And at that same moment, we get Dexter calling at Prater here about meeting, and Prater's like, oh yeah, come over tomorrow at 10, it'll just be the two of us. We then cut to the next day, and Batista is actually showing up to Prater's estate and says he needs to speak with Prater right away. The main guard says no, get lost, and Batista starts fighting him, and a couple others step in to also fight with him. Charlie winds up stepping in though, and agrees to have Prater meet with Angel. We have Angel show Prater the picture of him and Dexter from earlier that day, and he asks Prater how he knows him. Prater's like, you mean Mr. Schmidt? And Angel immediately spills everything and says, it's Dexter Morgan, we worked together for over 20 years in homicide. And it seems pretty evident at this point that Batista's almost thrown in the towel entirely and will do anything to take down Dexter, because knowing Dexter's background as the Barber Butcher, wouldn't Batista also assume that Prater's a bad guy? We then cut over to Dexter, and he's putting on another fingerprint of Red's and preparing to head out to take on Prater. Dexter does make it inside and is greeted by Prater, who wants to meet in the vault since it's more private so they can clear the air, and then calls him Dexter Morgan, which did have some similarity to when Trinity showed up at Miami Metro and did the same thing.
Hello, Dexter Morgan.
Charlie then pops out with a gun and takes away Dexter's knife. We have Prater go, I know exactly who you are, and I love it. And then they walk into the vault there, and we see that Angel is actually tied up on the ice truck killer table. And I will say I'm really liking the tension of how this scene is setting up. Prater then mentions it was odd how drawn Dexter was to the Barber Butcher blood slide box, but now it all makes so much sense. He also does realize that Dexter killed Lowell and the real Red, and Prater loves it and asks how he did it. To which we have Dexter respond with saying, what makes you think I'd talk about it in front of him, pointing at Angel? And then Prater's like, oh right, shh, and covers Angel's ears. He's so giddy talking to Dexter here. And he does essentially give Dexter an offer here. He tells him, I would like to be your benefactor, and is so pumped to meet the Barber Butcher It's like meeting his favorite celebrity. He wants to team up with Dexter and invite other killers to hang out and have Dexter kill them. But Prater says to seal moving forward with this, Dexter has to kill Batista. And Charlie doesn't seem to be on board here with trusting Dexter with a knife. We have Prater hand the knife to him anyway, and Dexter's like, "You want a front row seat to see how this is done?" Dexter looks over at Charlie, who's pointing the gun at him, and Prater acts like a little kid here, being like, "Mom, you're embarrassing me, give me the gun." We do then have Dexter lift up the knife as he normally would, killing somebody, and internally talks about how Batista will never give up, but as expected, he winds up cutting Batista loose here, as he says to himself, "We were partners once, maybe we can be partners again?" Batista then gets up and attacks Dexter straight away. Unfortunately, during that struggle, Prater winds up shooting Batista in the back. And at first, it looks like the wounds are just kind of on the outside of his body, but then after 5 or 6 shots, that kind of becomes irrelevant. And I have no idea why Batista didn't wait until they were outside to deal with Dexter, but I guess he was actually in too deep at this point to not see red being around Dexter, pun intended. I also don't really know what Dexter was expecting would happen if he cut Batista loose. Prater then does shoot at Dexter and misses. Charlie winds up grabbing Prater and runs out of the vault as Dexter grabs his axe from the wall and throws it towards them but also misses. Dexter then rushes over to a bleeding out Batista and finally mentions to him that he wasn't the one to kill LaGuerta or Dokes. And this is actually something I saw someone on Reddit mention the other day. Why hasn't Dexter told Batista about this? Is he gonna maybe forgive him for it? But I replied to that post actually saying, I don't think Batista really cares, which is proven here by Batista's response. It never really mattered to Batista who directly killed his friends and family. He knew that Dexter was involved, and that was enough for him. And we have Angel give his final words here saying, "Now I'm dying because of you, just like they did. Dexter Morgan, F you." And I guess so much for the idea that some people had that Batista was untouchable. Coming into the season, I definitely thought he would have been. And then after episode 1, it seemed pretty likely he was going to be the one to take down Dexter eventually. But as he got closer and closer to catching Dexter, and also his personality changed to being darker than the original show, it seemed he would eventually either die or where I thought they could go, and they kind of started to do so, pitch him as being crazy. And we have the episode ultimately fade to black with Dexter yelling no within that vault, with Mad World playing, and some pretty sad credits here of Batista's hat being made. And as for a score with this episode, I know I'm going to be an outlier here, and please be respectful, but this is going to be my first negative review of the season. One of the areas that didn't work for me was how careless Charlie behaved in this episode compared to how she was all season, and I do realize at times she was in a pretty vulnerable spot due to her mom. And after this episode, I don't think Charlie's actually going to die, but she does need a reason to keep quiet, since even though she acted on behalf of Prater, she was the first to be suspicious of Dexter. Maybe she could return as a season 2 threat. I do think it's pretty likely that Prater's going to be the final kill this season. The other main part that I disliked with this episode was how they handled Batista. The setup of that scene I really was into, but outside of Prater's hilarious antics, the execution fell flat for me. I realized that Batista is essentially the Hank from Breaking Bad of this show, but I would have kept his character alive at least a little bit longer. I assume that Wallace will likely take Batista's role in hunting down Dexter going forward, but I would have preferred keeping our old friend Angel. But that wraps up my thoughts. What did you think of this episode? What parts did you like or dislike? How do you think the show's ultimately going to wrap up? I assume Harrison's going to come and save Dexter from the vault, and he probably takes out the clear big bad Prater to close out this season. What are your thoughts on the New York Ripper plot? It feels like a major tease at this point, and I'm assuming it's a character we haven't met yet, and it'll be a season 2 thing. Do you think Dexter's going to reclaim his slides from Prater's vault? And will Quinn potentially replace Batista as our prominent and nostalgic character in season 2? Let's talk all things Dexter Resurrection down in the comments below, and also as an FYI, I'll be going live this week to discuss Dexter, so keep an eye out for that. I'd love to have you in the chat there. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.